Hello and welcome to Beyond Today, the program that addresses the future of our community through conversations with people who are working today for a better tomorrow. I'm Ray Charmonti, your host for Beyond Today and Assistant Executive Director for the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. In our last program, we talked about the impact of the U.S. Census. We will be talking today with our guests about new trends in environmental planning, including the concept of sustainability. Our guests are Judy Brueggemann, the City of Tampa's Environmental Liaison, and Tom Dyer, formerly of Two Rivers Ranch, but most recently a land use consultant, also the chairman of the Hillsborough County Greenways Task Force. Both of my guests today have a history of involvement in environmental issues. Judy, can you tell me a little bit about how you got involved in environmental issues? I know you've been very active for some time, both in government and as a citizen.
I think I grew up in it, Ray. I don't think I ever had a choice. I was born in Florida, and I think I started trekking after my granddaddy when I was about 2.5 or 3, and I was just totally hooked with everything that Florida's about.
Well, that's great. So it's kind of bred into you then.
Visceral, totally visceral.
Tom, how about you? How did you come to be interested in environmental issues?
I think more or less by default, Ray. A lot of my involvement began in opposition to condemnations, primarily of public projects that were going to impact natural resources and land areas that we owned and managed. So it was more or less by default that I came to realize that our current system wasn't working for the landowners, certainly not working for a lot of the citizens, and that it was time to try to figure out new ways to do and achieve our goals and objectives. So.
That's almost a little bit different way. It's like you were trying to protect the environment from government. You know, usually it's done in the opposite
Exactly,
way.
exactly.
Well, Judy, I know you're involved in this whole issue of sustainability, and I'm sure that many people in our audience aren't sure exactly what that word means. I know it's kind of a new buzzword for a lot of people. So what is sustainability, and how does it relate to both the environment and other parts of our culture?
Well, I think we could start with the idea that it has too many syllables. And once we move from that, it's the idea that it's an evolution of an idea, that somehow we have to deal with the carrying capacity of our environment. And at some point, I think people who were focused primarily on our economic well-being realized that the environment was important too. And those who had been focused primarily on our environmental well-being realized we couldn't ignore the economy. It's a smaller playing field, and we're trying to play together. Both those who are sure that we have to have a healthy economy and those that are sure we have to have a healthy environment.
Do you have any views on this whole sustainability issue?
A few.
Yes, Ray, and I think the beginning premise for me as I was becoming involved in this issue was a study that the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council had just completed that determined if we build out the state of Florida in accordance with the 67 county comprehensive growth management plans that we've adopted, that Florida's current population of 14 million would be allowed to grow to 97 million people. It was sort of an indicator to me that since 1985, when we adopted the Growth Management Act, that our attempts at trying to control growth have really fostered what I think is going to be the destruction of the state and our community from both an environmental, economic, and a quality of life standpoint. So the beginning to me was the recognition that Florida's current environmental regulatory programs and growth management efforts are not going to be sustainable regardless of how you define sustainability.
Great first start, but we've got to move beyond it. And you know, I think we're all proud of the fact that Florida was one of the early growth management states. But I think at this point we know how many problems growth management legislation has created for us. And somehow we've got to take the promise of growth management and move it to something that's a little more realistic and in fact really will protect our quality of life and really will protect our environment.
And that's where I think the local government element becomes, or home rule, Ray, becomes so important to this thing. It really, I think, is the beginning of a recognition that the solutions aren't in Washington and the solutions aren't in Tallahassee. The solutions to this are going to come out of the grassroots efforts and the recognition by our citizens that we're not willing to accept the destruction of our community as is currently contemplated. And there's the role for the local government element to be involved in this.
And one of the most important concepts of the idea of place-based ecosystem management is that wherever we live in the world, each spot in the world has unique environmental, social, economic, and quality of life conditions that we want to enhance and we want to optimize. We've got to look at it holistically, and we've got to look at it right under our feet, right where we live. Whether it be starting with, what our aquifer conditions are, what our soil conditions are, what can our agricultural community contribute to our well-being, what can our port contribute to our well-being, what can't. We have to put all of the pieces together such that we take care of things environmentally, economically, as holistically as possible.
Well, I know when I think about the term sustainability, I think that it means the community could somehow continue and prosper in the long run. I don't know if this is a accurate way of looking at it, but it regenerates itself, like sometimes an older neighborhood where people repair the houses and add on to them, and it continues to go on rather than to decline.
Right.
Is that kind of what sustainability means?
Recycling in the most profound sense.
Right.
Recycling our infrastructure, recycling our neighborhoods, recycling our skills, our talents, keeping pace with the universe, knowing that it always changes. It's always going to change. Let's just make that change positive and not let decline set in.
Well, I think one of the unfounded first recognitions that growth management wasn't going to achieve its original objectives happened when we began to really adopt urban policies that had unanticipated impacts on rural communities. So in our case, we haven't done a good job of developing or implementing rural policies. What we've done is adopted urban policies that are going to lead to the destruction and loss of agriculture in our community. And half of our land base, as you know, almost 360,000 acres in our county, are still in agricultural production. But if we continue down the road we're on currently, no pun intended, we're going to eliminate that land use, the economic benefits of that, and the quality of life for our urban citizens, or our rural citizens. So somehow we've got to integrate the rural into the urban and vice versa. Otherwise, the urban and urban sprawl are going to eventually destroy the quality of life for the rural. And I don't think that's a vision that I see for our community.
Not to mention that agriculture is truly a sustainable contribution to our economy, whereas much of our service economy, or, and not to upset the builders or anything, but there's a limit to, you can build yourself into oblivion within a place-based concept.
Well, I would think our whole issue with water, there's only so much water you can withdraw before you begin to have problems. And if you go beyond that or don't switch to something else, and that, just like anything, too much of a good thing isn't good anymore.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great indicator, Ray, and I think as a result of the Hillsborough Agricultural Task Force that our current chairman, Dottie Berger, helped found, we've just completed a study in that task force that basically determined that for every dollar in ad valorem taxes that the rural or agricultural lands pay receives less than 16 cents in services from the county. And for every dollar in ad valorem taxes urban residential pays requires over $1.53 in services from the county. So that's, I think, part of Judy's previous point. Agriculture is a positive economic contributor and in fact really provides a subsidy to the urban areas for the county to be able to provide the services there. Yet if we build out our county in accordance with our existing plan, we're going to eliminate agriculture as part of our future, and in doing so we lose the economic benefit of it, we lose the surplus ad valorem revenue that it generates, and we destroy I think, a very important, vibrant, and sustainable land use for future generations.
Well, I guess I can assume that neither of you want to see the county completely built out.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think that if we're talking about water, Tom and I were both for many years been involved in the Hillsborough River Greenways Task Force, and Tom is of course the current chair. There, from the beginning with that group, we were concerned about the protection of the watershed. You know, what is the carrying capacity for our watershed? It's something that normally we don't particularly like to think about, but we don't yet have instant solutions that provide more potable water. And I know there are those who always have faith in technology and, oh, it'll be okay tomorrow. Well, that's fine when tomorrow is here, but we're not there yet. So let's take care of what we know we have, and that's protecting our watershed, because there's a level at which it is our environment that gives us the water, you know. And
while agricultural lands and operations do require a lot of water, one of the other major benefits of agricultural and open space lands in our county and in our state is the recharge capacity that they sustain as a result of them staying in open space.
Parking lots don't help us much with a sustainable water supply.
No, I guess not.
I know some people don't believe that Hillsborough County could ever build out in the density that it's currently planned at. But I think we only have to look across the bay to Pinellas County or across the coast to Broward County to see what local governments can really do in eliminating agricultural and open space and destroying significant natural systems. So I don't believe the average citizen of our county understands that unless we have a new way of trying to change our future, that the future of this county is already adopted, the plan is already in place, and that plan I don't believe the average citizen would support if in fact they knew it.
Right. I think that's a good point, and when we return we'll talk some more about trends in environmental planning. Welcome back to Beyond Today. I'm your host, Ray Shermonti, and we've been discussing new environmental trends with Judy Bruggeman and Tom Dyer. Tom, I wanted to talk a little bit. You touched upon something about growth management and urban regulations. Can you tell us a little bit about what you mean as far as a negative impact on the rural environments of urban policies of growth management?
Well, I think another one of the consequences of growth management when we adopted it was one of the intents was to shift the cost of providing public infrastructure and transportation from the public to the private sector. And the reality is we haven't enforced what is known as concurrency to that point. So actually local governments, I think this is really ironic, local governments and transportation ends up really funding and citing the expansion of infrastructure and transportation without regard to its impact on rural areas. In other words, does growth follow the infrastructure, or does infrastructure follow the growth? And really what's happened, I believe, since '85 now is that growth is following the infrastructure, which was not supposed to happen. So as we cite a future transportation corridor through an existing agricultural area, well, it's not going to be very profitable to continue to run a dairy or a cow operation when you've got frontage on a major commercial highway. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And to me, one of the solutions for this should be a requirement where the local government should have to do nothing more than what the private sector has to do currently. And as you know, any future development above a certain threshold level has to do a development of regional impact, or a DRI. Mm-hmm. And I propose that the local government element should have to do a DRI on their own comprehensive plan. And I don't think that's really unreasonable if in fact the private sector has both the ability and the requirement to do that. Maybe it's time for local governments to look in the mirror and say, where is the long-term funding going to come from, and what is the cost of services? I think the recent passage of our half-cent tax in Hillsborough County is a good example of, while we were trying to anticipate our capital shortfalls, we did not anticipate where we're going to get the ad valorem revenue to pay for these facilities once they're up and operational. So the technology and expertise exists today, Ray, to really do a comprehensive build-out analysis of our current comprehensive plan. And by that I mean economically, environmentally. Let's share with our citizens what the future is as currently adopted, and require the local government elements to actually anticipate where are the schools going to be when we double our current population. How are we going to fund the transportation? We're already $3 billion behind on transportation now. Yet the plan doesn't reflect where the water, where the schools, where the infrastructure, and what the environmental impacts of the current plan is. Yet our elected officials are faced with making decisions on a daily basis because of what's already in that comprehensive plan. And I think this would then allow our average citizen to get involved in this process once they see what the consequences economically and environmentally are on them and their future generations and children if we build out this county in accordance with our existing plan.
Actually, I do have to agree with some of what you say, because there are a lot of, you mentioned schools, those are some of the missing ingredients. Really, police, libraries, all that isn't even addressed
Exactly.
by the comprehensive plan, and that those are all impacts on the citizens, which really it almost needs to be more comprehensive than it is.
And it's as Judy said, and I think it's the right way. I'm not in favor of abolishing the Growth Management Act. I think the vehicle that's there that allows a local government to update its comprehensive plan twice a year, this is the vehicle we could use to fix this. But it needs to be realistic and sustainable, and it needs to be a vision that the average citizen can understand and participate in. It's their quality of life that's going to be dramatically affected unless we do something different.
And I think really what we're talking about, in a way, to get at a very simple level, we need to think in terms of a new kind of conservation plan. A conservation plan that goes beyond what we normally think of as the environment, and take our whole environment into consideration, the built environment as well, and have that take on an equal meaning in terms of carrying capacity that we now think of in terms of clean water, clean air, nice pretty trees, nice birds and bees. We have to take to the built environment.
I think that is really an important concept, because many times people tend to separate things into little boxes, and it isn't a good idea because it all does fit together.
Right.
But it's hard to communicate that to people.
And we're not going to achieve it, Ray, without incentives. You know, we have 6 volumes of state statutes, over 300,000 rules, and I don't know how many million local ordinances statewide. And we now know what this process of all of this regulatory stuff is going to deliver, and that's 97 million people. Well, at some point, I got to tell you, I don't believe another 6 volumes of state statutes or another 300,000 rules are going to fix it. I think it's time to work with the landowners, work with the development sector, work with the realtors and builders, and develop an incentive-based alternative to our current regulatory process. And I think until we make it more profitable to do infill and redevelopment in brownfields, the builders are going to follow the infrastructure that the local government's funding. And we have wonderful opportunities in Tampa and in Hillsborough County to do restoration and enhancement where we already have the infrastructure exist. We don't need to worry about concurrency or expansion. Yes, some of it needs to be renovated, but the base facilities are there. My gosh, we've got schools in wonderful locations that are closed.
Fabulous old buildings, and we have a statewide system that basically is prejudiced against old school buildings. So we need to really think about how we use all of our environment, the built to.
Right, and that's a good point of bringing it together. You touched upon the idea of regulation, the way we've been doing things by regulation. There's a new way of looking at that, I guess, and you talked about incentives. Can you talk a little bit more about what a new way of looking at protecting the environment is?
Yes, Ray. I had the opportunity of chairing the Role of Private Landowners Group for Secretary Weatherall's Department of Environmental Protection's Ecosystem Management Initiative. And in that group, we had 16 million acres, basically all of the remaining private land in Florida represented from each of the land use groups, the developers and builders, phosphate, agriculture, citrus, and so forth. And we developed over 75 recommendations that were eventually, for the most part, adopted by the department and took the form of the Ecosystem Management Initiative that Hillsborough County is fortunate to have the pilot project for. And it basically is a very simple concept, Ray, and it's having an applicant or a permittee do more than, not less, doing more than what is required under our current regulatory standards that would deliver a significant net environmental benefit, but at the same time providing that applicant or permittee with the benefit as well. And that might be off-site mitigation, that might be an accelerated review and permitting process. In other words, we've got to move from this regulated, ineffective system into one that provides incentives for applications and permittees to have an alternative voluntary process. And I want to really stress the importance of that. What we proposed and what Florida DEP is attempting to implement is not the elimination of any of the current regulatory standards that the state, the water management districts, or local governments have. It's to provide a second alternative and voluntary process that would provide benefit for the applicant, but also result in a better environmental benefit for the community and the natural systems.
Judy, you talked about something that kind of ties in with this idea that each environment is different. Yeah. One of the problems I see is when you have like a standard regulation, it's like this one-size-fits-all mentality,
well, brownfields,
and it doesn't work.
Brownfields and what's happening around the country with the brownfield strategies, it deals with exactly that. It is insane to try and restore our urban environments to a pristine condition. It isn't going to happen. No one can afford to do it. And if you could afford to do it, why would you spend your money that way? Because, for example, there are a lot of reasons why we have to worry about groundwater throughout Florida because of the nature of our aquifer. But the reality is, we are never going to be putting drinking water wells in downtown Tampa. So it makes no sense whatsoever to try and clean up the groundwater underneath the city, the core of the city, to drinking water standards. We now have a strategy of risk-based assessment for sites that we would at one time have regarded as evil contaminated sites. Basically, it means if you're thinking about putting a day center for senior citizens or a daycare center for children, that's fairly high risk. You don't want to do anything that's going to jeopardize human health or safety. You have to clean that up property a whole lot. But if you're going to put a parking lot there or a warehouse there, who cares? Because it's going to be, if it's capped, it's going to be minimal, if any, impact to any humans that are using the area, and as long as it's not drifting off to other sites that would cause problems in the environment, so be it. We'll clean it up however much we have to, no more.
So you're talking about maybe having regulations fit the use rather than just a flat regulation.
And so it's a redevelopment, reusing our infrastructure in ways that would not endanger human health or safety. Clean up a little bit, clean up however much you have to, but no more. And in that way, hopefully we can recycle reuse, redevelop a lot of our cities around the country, and particularly Tampa, Hillsborough County.
You know, we talked about brownfields, but I don't think we've defined it. Tell us, what is a brownfield?
A brownfield is any property, whether it be merely perceived to be contaminated, or if it has real contaminants on the site, that by reusing that area, by cleaning it up to whatever level necessary and reusing it, it will prevent industrial, commercial expansion into greenfields, into unused open space. Let's leave that unused open space the way it is.
So basically what
Yeah.
you're saying is reuse vacant spaces we have within the urban
Right,
area, because
right.
then we won't have to use them in the rural area.
And certainly, I mean, we've got a lot of challenges in an old city like Tampa, and I don't have to tell you about it. You're involved with it all the time. But, you know, a lot of our commercial areas, maybe there were dry cleaners, maybe there were paint stores, maybe there were, you know, auto supply stores, whatever. Just stuff left there that's not too nice. And the commercial zones can sometimes be really narrow. No. We're going to have some challenges. But we've got to do it.
Right.
We've got to do it for the vitality and the health of our city.
Well, I think today we've touched upon an awful lot of things related to the environment, and even beyond what normally people think are the environment. And I'd like to thank today's guest for talking with us about issues that we'll face in the future. Thank you. Next month, we'll talk about new trends and incentives to encourage good community design. There's another issue we'll face in the future on Beyond Today. Let us know if you have any comments about today's shows. You can reach us at our hotline, which will be in the credits. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Ray Charmonti, and on behalf of the Planning Commission, I thank you for thinking beyond today.